Good morning. Welcome to King's Report News Hour for the fourth day in the, let's call it the leap sixth month of 16th year of Chang'e. I checked around, and apparently the most commonly used term in English is the word leap, so leap sixth month. Although it seems a little bit strange because when February has 29 days, we don't call that, we call that the leap year, right? Or is that also a leap day? I don't know. Anyway, leap month seems to be the way it's most often referred to in English, so we'll go with that, I guess. I bow to custom. The leap sixth month. We are repeating the sixth month this year. Okay. And let's go around the kingdom and see what's going on there. And right now in Chongpyeong, Tennessee, 71 degrees and clear, getting up to 88 today, humid with clouds and sunshine, a thunderstorm in spots this afternoon. 70 for a low, thunderstorm in spots this evening, otherwise clear to partly cloudy and humid. And in Cheongju, father's hometown in North Pyongan province, what is still today North Korea, currently 90 degrees, mostly sunny, and getting down to 73 tonight, clear to partly cloudy and uncomfortably humid. Tomorrow, partly sunny, very warm, very humid, 90 degrees again. At the Cheonryugun Palace in Northeast Pennsylvania, 67 degrees and sunny. And today, partly sunny, hot, humid, 93 for a high. Tonight, mainly clear and humid, 64 for a low. At the Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground, 71 right now, mostly clear, getting up to 97 today, mostly clear and very warm. Tonight, clear at 74. At the Suncheon Palace in Korea, currently sunny and 84, getting up to 99. Wait a second, that's tomorrow, 99 tomorrow. Today or this evening, getting down to 73 with under clear skies. Tomorrow, sun in areas of high clouds and very hot, 99 degrees for a high tomorrow at the Suncheon Palace. And at the Gunma Palaces in Japan, no relief there from Suncheon, currently 91 and partly cloudy, 77 for a low tonight, 99 also for a high tomorrow, mostly sunny and very hot. And then at the Ilan, Taiwan, it is currently 82 degrees and clear, getting down to 77 tonight. A thunderstorm in spots seeming, otherwise partly cloudy. Tomorrow, 90 degrees, a couple of morning showers, otherwise considerable cloudiness. You know what I'm discovering about Ilan? You know, it's, I think it's right on or below the Tropic of Cancer, isn't it? But, or is it Capricorn? Anyway, one of those. Okay. I could never keep those in line when I was in school. But anyway, subtropical weather or climate, and yet I guess it's because of the sea breeze. It's not as hot as some places like, for example, Gunma Palaces or even Suncheon in Korea. Even though Korea is considerably north of Taiwan, still temperatures can be lower. All right, let's take a look at Father's Word. And where are we today? We're in the path of the person of completed testament age. Is that what they call it in English? I'm not sure. Anyway, that's a literal translation of the book title. And chapter 2, view of family. Let's look at this one here. The 참 부모의 사랑, 참 스승의 사랑, 참 주인의 사랑입니다. So it's the love of true parents, love of the true teacher, and love of a true owner. And what is this? Already, this should ring a bell. True parent, true teacher, true owner. That is the three subject partners. Three, what Father calls, and then he calls this the 삼대 주체 사상. So this is Father's version of 주체 ideology, which North Korea refers to, and they translate as self-reliance. But for Father, 주체 for North Korea means that they are the subject partner to everybody else. And so they are self-reliant. And Father is saying that, no, we have three subject partners, each of us, We have our true parents, we have our true teachers, and we have our true owner, or that we must become those three things ourselves. Okay. So Father says, 이 3대 주체 사상의 중심에 자리는 하나입니다. So the center position of this three 주체 thought is one. 참 가정의 부모를 중심 삼고 하나입니다. So centering on the parents, or the parent of the, or parents, shall we say, parents of the true family, this position is one. 선생님도 밤이 되면 집에 들어가지요. So when the evening comes, I also return to my family. I return home. 대통령이라도 밤이 되면 집에 들어가야 되죠. President as well. When the evening comes, he has to return home. So 그렇기 때문에 부모 사랑을 중심 삼은 대신자가 교육하는 것이 학교입니다. And so the school then is a place, a school is a place where we are taught by people who stand in the position who love us in the position of parents. 부모 사랑을 대신하여 나라를 다스리는 자가 대통령이라는 것입니다. And the president is someone who governs the country in the position of or with the parent love, with parent love. Yeah. I've talked to you about this before, but we had several of us in the community here had some give and take with give and receive with the Reverend Yu about this idea that the president is in the subject partner position and the citizens of the country are in the opposite partner position. And my argument, of course, was that, well, wait a second, the president is chosen by the people. So the president is a creation of the people. And how can you have the creators be in the object partner position and the created being, in other words, the president being the subject partner position? Of course, he's coming from, well, anyway, he'll say, I'm just, repeating Father's words. But if you were to change president to king, then that would be okay, because now king is not chosen by the people. The king is in the lineage that God has chosen. And so if you want to say that the king is in the subject partner position and the citizens are in the object partner position, then that makes sense. That's consistent with principle. But not the president, right? Anyway, so finally this time he said, okay, then the leaders, I think he said, the leaders of the country, which is not a very good compromise in my opinion. But anyway, but obviously, yes, I think our view is correct from a principle point of view. All right, so let's go to what's happening. And yesterday, well, first let me tell you, before I go to yesterday was the 82nd anniversary of the armistice of the Korean War. We'll get to that in a minute. But first I want to tell you, you know how the government is handing out money to people in Korea? And I told you that my wife and I, we had nothing to do with this because we're foreigners and all that. But then my sister-in-law, my wife's younger sister, calls up and says, hey, you know what? I got my money from the president and I want to spend it on you getting your hair done. Apparently my wife is married to someone who doesn't really take enough care of her appearance, I guess. And so her younger sister took pity on her and took her to a hair salon. And then on the way back, they stopped off at a convenience store and said, well, Tim is all alone at home, poor guy, waiting for you to come home. So let's take him something. And so they bought a little container of a Ben and Jerry's ice cream, which they know to be one of my favorites. So now I owe the president a trip to the hair salon for my wife, and a container of Ben& Jerry's ice cream. Anyway, sister-in-law is very, very sweet, very sweet. She didn't want to spend the money, or at least not spend all the money on herself. She wanted to give us a gift with it, which I thought was very sweet. So that's the sort of the epilogue of that situation. and apparently they're going to people like it so much that they're going to hand out more money in the future. Of course, this is all really crazy because it's going to cause inflation, and inflation is going to hit the people that this handout is supposed to help. In other words, the lower income people. As I mentioned, I think last week, you can only spend this money in a certain area, and you can only spend it on only spend it at businesses that have less than $2 million roughly in annual sales. And so it's targeted towards lower income people, which of course is the basic sort of political support base of the current president. But it's going to hurt them because inflation is going to come, and asset prices will go up, and so the rich will benefit from inflation, or at least not suffer nearly as much by inflation, but whereas the people in the lower rungs of the economic ladder, the economic pyramid, are going to suffer because their wages are not going to go up as fast as inflation, or the wages will go up after inflation has come. So wages will be a trailing situation. But anyway, people always like free stuff, right? They like free stuff, and as Kupchinin pointed out in his lectures 15 years ago, what is it now, 13, 14, 15 years ago, this is the problem with democracy, that people figure out that you can vote yourself free stuff, or vote for candidates that are going to give you free stuff, and that's exactly what they've done. And so now this president is handing out free stuff, and it's well, this is how democracies die, basically. All right, so let's go now to the anniversary yesterday of the war, or the armistice, shall we say? Now, well, at the end, or kind of the end of the fighting of the Korean War. The Korean War is still ongoing technically, and it tends to flare up from time to time, but it essentially ended on July 27th, 1953. And when Father met with General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, in 1965, he told Eisenhower that signing the armistice was a historic mistake. Of course, Eisenhower was president at the time of the signing. Truman was the president when the Korean War first broke out, and he I guess Truman did get the United States involved in the war, but he fired MacArthur, and so Father's opinion of Truman was he's not a true man, he's a bad man. I remember Father saying that in some of his speeches at Belvedere. Those were the only words that I could understand back then. That Truman was not a true man; he was a bad man for firing General MacArthur. General MacArthur wanted to, of course, fight the war to a successful conclusion. In other words, uniting the Korean Peninsula under a U.S. ally in Seoul. My uncle was served in the Korean War. He was part of the Army Intelligence Corps, and apparently it was very, very frustrating for him and his colleagues because they were questioning Chinese prisoners of war far before China actually invaded. I think China celebrates someday in October, I think October 20 something, as the day that they formally entered the war in 1950. But already in early October, at least, my uncle said that he and his people were capturing and questioning Chinese prisoners of war. And so it was obvious that China was entering the war at that point, but they couldn't get the higher ups to take them seriously. And I think MacArthur probably suffered maybe some racism. He had defeated the Japanese in the Pacific, and I think he didn't really consider the Chinese to be very capable fighters, perhaps, I don't know. But anyway, for whatever reason, they refused to acknowledge the intelligence reports that were coming from their people in the field. And of course, then they paid the price for that. So anyway, eventually the Korean War ended not exactly on the 38th parallel. In fact, on the western side of the peninsula, the current military demarcation line, the current demilitarized zone, comes below the 38th parallel, whereas on the eastern side of the peninsula, it goes above the 30th parallel. So on the eastern side, well, those of us who are here in South Korea can actually drive up to the 30th parallel and beyond. There's actually a rest stop on the highway at the 30th parallel, where they sell all sorts of knickknacks about the 30th parallel. And then you can continue to drive up to the DMZ. And then I remember doing that once. And then you get to the military outpost, the army outpost there, the South Korean outpost. And then they show you a propaganda film. And then once you view the film, then you can go out onto the viewing deck or something like that, where you can sort of look over the border into North Korea. But anyway, not get distracted by that. This is a coverage of how North Korea celebrated the holiday, or not the holiday, but the day yesterday. South Korea does not pay attention to this day, actually. And I think for South Koreans, this is not a particularly important day. Of course, South Korea never did sign the armistice agreement. They still have not signed the armistice agreement. Because Syngman Rhee, the president at that time of South Korea, refused, and Syngman Rhee sort of said, well, you guys go ahead and sign it, but I don't want anything to do with this. He wanted a united Korea as well, as did Father. So Father spoke to Eisenhower in 1965, which was, of course, already 12 years after the signing, telling him that his signing was a historic mistake. Anyway, let's look at what went on in North Korea yesterday. North Korea ignores recent troop deaths, tempers anti-US message on war holiday. I think holiday, not really the right word, is it? Okay, not really, I guess. Well, for North Korea it is, because they're celebrating the victory, they call it a victory. Coverage of Kim Jong-un's appearance for Korean War anniversary suggests sensitivity over military deployment to Russia. And this is nknews.org, which is often pretty good in terms of its reporting of North Korean stuff. Oh, no, they let me see the whole thing a while ago, but now they don't want to show it to me anymore. All right, okay, my mistake. Okay. Can I print it? Perhaps? No. 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 That's too bad. Okay. Well, anyway, what it said, I read it, and then what it said was that North Korea, and yesterday's holiday, Kim Jong-un visited a couple of anti-US museums, and it was the first time in 10 years that he visited this particular museum that claims to show American atrocities against North Koreans during the war, and also South Korean atrocities during the war. And, there were atrocities on both sides, I know. My wife is from a village that changed hands 4 times, and uh, and her mother had 3 brothers who were all killed by the North Koreans one by one. Well, actually, 2 were killed. One was kidnapped to North Korea. And so I've been fully briefed on the atrocities of the communists that the communists committed in that village during the war and against their family during the war. Uh, the war is hell. War is hell. That is certainly true. And then, so that's why we avoid war at all costs. But once war starts, then yes, there are atrocities, and I think there are atrocities on both sides. And certainly the United States is not immune to this. The United States is not completely innocent of this either. But so as someone was saying about what Israel is doing in Gaza right now, one commentator was saying, look, during the Second World War, the United States bombed civilians. They bombed Dresden. Of course, they killed a lot of civilians both in cities such as Dresden and also in Berlin. Berlin was mostly Soviet, but many civilians were killed by the Allies. But the responsibility for those deaths lies with the Nazis who started the war in the first place. And also when the United States firebombed Tokyo in the spring of 1945 and killed, well, no one really knows how many civilians died, but in the tens of thousands in one night. Hospitals were bombed, schools, and of course, family homes, and actually napalm, we heard about a lot. Napalm we heard a lot about that during the Vietnam War, but napalm was actually developed specifically for the bombing of Japanese cities, because at that time, most Japanese homes were made of wood. So the idea was that they could bomb Japanese cities with this incendiary material. Tens of thousands, perhaps 100,000. Some estimates go as high as 100,000 people died in one night in Tokyo in the spring of 1945 as a result of American bombing. But again, the responsibility for those deaths does not lie with Americans or with the American military, but with the Japanese military and the Japanese government that started the war in the Pacific in the first place. And so also whatever atrocities may have been committed by either side in the Korean War, whether those atrocities were committed in the North or in the South, or by the North or by the South, or by UN forces or by China, all the responsibility certainly lies with Kim Il-sung, who started that war. And so that's why the North Koreans will, even to this day, try to tell you that the war was started by the South Koreans invading the North, which is, of course, something that does not hold any credibility outside of North Korea. I told this story a long time ago. Maybe I can tell it again, of my first a couple of experiences at the North Korean border at the Panmunjom, where as a reporter during the 1980s, early 1980s, I would go there sometimes to cover the meetings of the Military Armistice Commission. And, we would go there and nothing actually went on in the meetings. And so what we would do, by we, I mean journalists from the South, we would go across that line into the northern part of the Panmunjom area, just like President Trump did when he met Kim Jong-un there. And we would go across that high rise, that sort of inch high, thing there, the line there, and go in there, and we would talk to the North Koreans on the other side. They would never come over to the south, but we would go over to the north. And before we went, of course, we had to sign a waiver with the UN headquarters saying that we understood that if something happened to us on the other side of the line, that they would not be able to help us, that we would be on our own and so forth. So anyway, I go over there, and my first time there, and a North Korean journalist, they were not journalists, they were intelligence agents, I'm sure. But anyway, uh, approached me and asked me for my uh, impression of Panmunjom, because they always keep track of who's there, and they knew that it was my first time. And I said that, well, I thought Panmunjom was a symbol of the tragedy of Korea, of the Korean Peninsula. And he nodded. Okay, yeah, okay. Oh, good. We have a progressive guy here. And then the next time I went, as soon as I crossed over, the guy makes a beeline towards me. He actually had some business on his mind. He had a question to ask me, because I guess maybe he took his report back to his bosses, and they said, well, next time you see him, you need to ask this other question. And he asked me, so the second time I was there, he asked me, what do you think of the presence of U.S. troops in South Korea? I think that was the question, or something like that. And I said, I'm on the northern side of the border, right? And I've signed a waiver saying that if I get into trouble, no one's going to come and help me. Okay. And I'm unarmed. And everybody around me, and all the North Koreans around me, obviously are armed. So I said, well, I think that question was answered in 1950. That's what I said. And he looks at me and he scoffs. He says, at least that's what you've been told. So I flunked the test. I was outed as a non-progressive. Anyway, that was not the only conversation we had, but that's all I need to tell you today. Anyway, so North Korea, for North Korea, this was Victory Day, and they've, of course, even though they were defeated by MacArthur's troops in the course of about 3 months, I guess. They invaded June 20th, and by the end of September, they've been pushed back, or beginning of October, they've been pushed all the way back up to the Chinese border in some places. And they were on the verge of total annihilation when Mao Zedong decided to help them out and sent in the quote volunteers from China. Yes, in a communist country, they've got a lot of volunteers. Communist countries are pretty good at having people volunteer. All right, so that's that, and then let's go to the second story on North Korea, which is that the new president is supposed to be pro-North Korea, pro-China, pro-North Korea, and so obviously on this anniversary of North Korea's great victory, so to speak, I think he wanted to try to make a friendly overture toward North Korea, but they slapped his hand down. Let's see here. North Korea says South Korea's overtures are a great miscalculation. North Korea has no interest in any policy or proposal for reconciliation from South Korea, the powerful sister of its leader, Kim Jong-un, said on Monday in a first response to South Korean liberal President Lee Jae-myung's peace overtures. Well, let's not call him liberal. Let's call him leftist. Okay, leftist President Lee Jae-myung's peace overtures. Kim Yo-jong, who is the senior North Korean ruling party official and is believed to speak for the country's leader, said Lee's pledge of commitment to South Korea-U.S. security alliance shows he is no different from his hostile predecessor. If South Korea expects to reverse all the consequences of its actions with a few sentimental words, there could be no greater miscalculation than that, Kim said in comments carried by official KCNA agency. Lee, who took office on June 4th after winning a snap election called after the removal of hardline conservative Yoon Suk-yeol over a failed attempt at martial law, has vowed to improve ties with Pyongyang that had reached its worst level in years. In one measure aimed at easing tensions, Lee suspended loudspeaker broadcasts blasting anti-North propaganda across the border and banned the flying of leaflets by activists that had angered Pyongyang. Kim, the North Korean official, said those moves are merely a reversal of ill-intentioned activity by South Korea that should never have been initiated in the first place. In other words, it's not even something worth our assessment, she said. We again make clear the official position that whatever policy is established in Seoul or proposal is made, we are not interested and we will not be sitting down with South Korea and there is nothing to discuss. But here she says that said Lee's pledge of commitment to South Korea-U.S. security alliance shows he is no different from his hostile predecessor. So basically, she's saying, okay, this is the condition. If you want to play nice with us, you have to break the South Korea-U.S. security alliance. And as long as you are pledging your commitment to that alliance, then we're not interested in talking to you. So obviously, the corollary to that is go ahead and break the alliance first, and then we can talk. And Lee Jae-myung is kind of in a hard place on that, the current president, because a difficult place on that because certainly conservatives, but also independents, and also many, or I would say most, even leftists are pretty leery about breaking ties with the United States. I think there is a radical element that says that the U.S. never should have intervened in the Korean War, that the Korean Peninsula would have been united, except for the intervention by the United States, and therefore that was a bad move by the United States. This is what the sort of the extreme left says in South Korea. But the vast majority of people, in my experience, not just conservatives, but even pretty far down that on the left side of the spectrum, agree that the United States intervention was a good thing, that Korea needs to maintain the alliance with the United States. There are a lot of conservatives, including blessed central families in Korea, who are calling for strengthening the U.S.-South Korea alliance. But I have not seen anyone overtly calling for the weakening or the abolition of U.S.-South Korean alliance. There are people who would like to see U.S. troops withdrawn, that is true. But I think they are fairly small minority in my assessment here. I've not seen any actual public opinion polls on that. I'm not even sure if official public opinion polls are being taken. Obviously, organizations such as the CIA will take their own polls on situations like this. At least I hope so. That's what they're being paid to do. They better be doing it. So keeping track of South Korean opinion on that, but obviously I have not been privy to any such polls myself. But that's my own sort of feeling that I get in the country. But we'll see. Especially, if the next president in the United States is a leftist, then I think things could change, and they could change fairly rapidly. President Trump, in his first term, sort of said a few things about possibly withdrawing U.S. troops. I think he said it again this time. But I think it's pretty clear to everyone that this is a negotiating card that he's using, and that he is not really serious about withdrawing U.S. forces. And of course, U.S. military leaders have testified before Congress that U.S. forces in Korea play a strategic importance not only for the Korean Peninsula, but also in countering China, and both China and Russia in the Asian in East Asia. So we'll see what happens with that, but at least for now, I think North Korea has said, okay, break the alliance, but I don't think there's much interest in doing that here in South Korea. Okay. All right, then let's see here. So President Trump has, during the weekend, end of last week and beginning of this week, has signed trade deals with what? He's now done UK, he's done the EU now, and he's done Japan, India, of course. And so the big ones that remain are South Korea and China. China is the big one that still remains, and South Korea also remains. But we'll see how those go this week. But it looks like he's driving a pretty hard bargain with everyone, and eventually they all come to his terms. And so we'll see how that shakes out in sort of it's a new trading order of the world, really. And I don't think anyone really has a full idea of how it's going to affect uh, geopolitics or even the world financial system. President Trump is saying that the tariffs that are being collected may allow him to give a rebate to all Americans. We'll have to see about that. That would be interesting because that will not, I guess, increase the money supply as it is, because he's just taking money that is already in the Treasury from the tariffs and then handing it out to Americans to spend on whatever they want. So we'll see how that works. If first of all, we'll have to see whether it actually happens. Okay. All right, let's look at some of the headlines here. Let's start with the Newsmax headlines. President Trump on Sunday said the United States and the European Union had reached an agreement on a trade deal that includes a 15% tariff on EU goods entering the US and significant EU purchases of US energy and military equipment. The deal also calls for $600 billion in investments in the US by European Union, he told reporters. Well, President Trump has been putting a lot of emphasis on bringing hundreds of billions of dollars in investment into the United States. And of course, that is going to support the value of the dollar. So he's sort of, in terms of the dollar, he's sort of doing two contradictory policies, isn't he? On the one hand, he's doing policies that support the value of the dollar, but on the other hand, he's doing stuff that actually undermines the value of the dollar. And so, see where the dollar is right now. Okay, it's up a bit, about less than just over 0.5% here to 98. Okay, so it's up to 98 now. That's an index. That's not a unit. It's an index. It looks like the dollar is up against all currencies, major currencies on this list, except for the Brazilian real. These red arrows down mean that New Zealand, Australia, UK, and Europe, these currencies are down against the US dollars. That means the US dollar is up against them. So US dollar is up against every currency on this list except for the Brazilian currency as a result of these weekend trade deals. Okay. And also the stock market futures looks like they're also, at least the US futures are up. Japanese stock market today went down more than 1%. Okay. The UK stock market right now is down a little bit. So it's interesting, and we need to, as I mentioned, I think on Saturday, we need to understand that even if we don't take an interest so much in economics, even if we're not invested in the markets in any way, we need to understand that we're living through a transitional period in world economics, world finances. And it's something that's going to affect every single human being alive. So we need to keep track of what's going on, and we need to make sure that we are going to be on the right side of the change, not on the bad side of the change, so that we're not victimized by the change. And I think one way to do that, in my opinion, not financial advice, not economic advice, one way to do that is make sure that our assets, whatever they may be, even if they're small, okay, but whatever they may be, make sure your assets are, or at least a good portion of them are, outside of the current financial system. In other words, don't leave your money in the bank. It's not financial advice, just personal opinion for entertainment purposes only. Okay. All right, so that's that's what happened there. And says here, use von der Leyen's 50% was the best we could get. Okay, I need to share this with you again. And US officials 15% tariffs on EU cars and pharmaceuticals. Oh, pharmaceuticals are pretty expensive as they are. Okay, in the US. All right, well, okay, we'll see what happens there. Italia's Meloni, she's the prime minister there in Italy. Trade deal a positive, details still needed. Okay. And then US and China are going to meet this week in Stockholm to talk trade there. And of course, Trump is still calling on the Senate to cancel its August recess to confirm appointees. Every president that comes in has, I think, thousands of jobs that he has to fill, and many of them have to be approved by the Senate. And the U.S. is in Malaysia for Cambodia-Thailand talks. Looks like Cambodia and Thailand have basically stopped bombing each other, which is good. And the TikTok situation, right? Okay. And let's see here. Here we go. Tariff revenue could mean rebates. We'll see. Okay. Don't hold your breath. Okay. And EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is expected to say that greenhouse gases aren't harmful. I'll have to see about that. I think, anyway, what's to see? Preparing to upend the foundational scientific determination about the harms of greenhouse gases that underpins the U.S. government's ability to curb climate change. Who's writing this? I'll bet it's Reuters. AFP. Okay, well, even worse than Reuters. AFP is a French wire service. So yes, they're going to defend the narrative, the accepted narrative. And a proposal from the Environmental Protection Agency to change the so-called endangerment finding was sent to the White House on June 30th, a spokesman told AFP. An announcement is expected imminently. Here's what to know and what's at stake if the finding is overturned. Okay, well, we're not interested in what AFP has to say about that. That is interesting that the EPA may overturn that finding. Have you seen that clip where one of the senators, a conservative senator, is asking one of the sort of witnesses, this is in a committee hearing, how much of the air is carbon dioxide? How much of the air we breathe is carbon dioxide? And different experts give different numbers, 5%, 10%. And of course, they're all wrong. I think high school chemistry, isn't it, teaches us that air is something like 79% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. Let's just check there of air is carbon, how much carbon dioxide is in the air. Okay. Okay, really. All right. So it is carbon dioxide. Okay, when you want, maybe I should have asked for the percentage. It was a very small percent, something like 0.032%, I think, right? And so they show us graphs like this that make it look like it's going up an incredible amount. And relatively speaking, I suppose it is, but here we go, 0.042% of atmosphere. Okay. All right. Yeah. So it just logically it seems, I think, kind of incredible that people are making such a big deal over something that is 0.042% of the atmosphere. Um, anyway, and also I think that we've seen studies that the amount of greenery in the world on the Earth has increased, together with the increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. And that makes sense because, trees and plants, they need carbon dioxide in order to do their in order to breathe, in order to do their thing. They take in carbon dioxide. During the day at least, they take in carbon dioxide and spit out the oxygen. All right, so and then they store the carbon, right? They store the carbon. Okay. All right, so the big headline, of course, is on the Breitbart is the EU deal. And let's see here. There was a stabbing in Walmart, and an armed citizen helped to subdue the stabber. Okay. Okay, let's see. And here we get Lindsey Graham again. I'm not a fan of this guy. Change in strategy coming to take Gaza down like we did in Tokyo and Berlin. Well, as I said a moment ago, the way we took down Tokyo was to basically to burn the place to the ground and killed tens of thousands, perhaps as many as 100,000 civilians in one night. And Berlin also by bombing. So Lindsey Graham, not a fan of his. Not a fan of his. Yes, any deaths will be the responsibility of Hamas. That's true, but I think the situation in Gaza is not analogous to the situation in Tokyo and Berlin. Okay. All right, let's see here. Islamic State-backed rebels, Islamic State, in other words, that's ISIS, attacked Catholic Church in Congo. Nearly 3 dozen are dead. Still all sorts of bad things going on. Family of socialist Zohran Mamdani throws wedding party fit for the elite. I think this was done in Africa, wasn't it? I believe. Secluded Ugandan compound, right? Okay. All right. Let's see. Yeah, this we've covered this already. The Arizona woman sentenced to 8 years for helping North Korean spies infiltrate U.S. companies. Yeah, maybe I should have stayed with Newsmax for a little bit longer. Alan Dershowitz says Maxwell's whole truth will disappoint. Of course, Dershowitz himself is on the list. We know that. Okay. Cartel is shifting methods with Trump. Let's take a look at that. Keep coming with new paths to get their contraband where they want it to go, including now with unmanned semi-submersible watercraft to circumvent the Trump administration's efforts to keep them out. Well, they've been using these unmanned semi-submersible watercraft already for some time, and some of them have been captured by the Coast Guard. You have to look at the cartels like water. They're always going to come up with a new path to get where they need to go. And so with these new unmanned semi-submersibles that they have the capacity to bring folks to the Gulf of America. We've seen that through some of our investigation, thanks to the efforts of men and women of Border Patrol sealing off the river and the land border. And the cartels have also moved to bring people through the Gulf into the United States in areas like Florida and Alabama. Added, the cartels are also able to bring in advanced technology. While President Joe Biden was in office, including using drones to drop off drugs. We were having our 100,000 drone incursions from the cartel every month while the Biden administration was in office. So they've been investing in technology heavy in order to ensure their profit margin is kept. Yes. So what does this tell you? What does this tell you? I hope the answer is obvious. It tells you that we've got to do something about the demand side. We got to cut the demand. As long as the demand is there, suppliers will find a way to serve their customers. That's the way business works. That's the way the free market works. And the criminal world is kind of ironically a free market. Yes, instead of competition, of course, they kill people off and stuff. But in that sense, it is a kind of a free market. It's warm in here. I'm taking a lot of water. I'm sorry. They will continue to find ways to supply. So the demand side, and how do we do that? I hope the answer there is obvious there as well by now. Family. We have to serve. We have to encourage. Fix my. We have to encourage heterosexual two-parent families. Heterosexual two-parent families. That'll fix the demographic problem. That'll fix the drug problem. It'll alleviate the drug problem, of course. And we're talking over time, right? It's not going to do it overnight. Nothing's going to do it overnight. There are no quick fixes. But over time, if the government will start encouraging heterosexual two-parent families, it's going to start fixing a whole lot of problems that we have. Drugs being one of them, the demographics being another one of them, and a whole bunch of other stuff that we have going on. Okay, so that's the family is where the solutions lie, but the government keeps on insisting that it can do a better job than parents, and so they weaken the parents' position and want to take over the families themselves. So that's what's happening. That's what's happening with this now. Okay. All right, and I think also even President Trump, I say even, but relatively, okay, President Trump is relatively a good guy within American politics right now. There are some people who are better than him, but they don't have the political base. They don't have the wherewithal to get elected. And the one important qualification for being president is that you have to be able to get elected. No matter how good a president you may be, you're not going to be a president unless you can figure out how to get elected. And that includes having, gazillion dollars at your command that you can spend on an election and so forth. And so I think I could name a number of people who would be better off, who would be better as president than President Trump, but none of them are able to get elected. So it's no use. Right? Anyway, so this is why it's important that the Chattanooga Constitution minimizes the role of money in a government. And if you read the Chattanooga Constitution, you can see how they do that by limiting the constituency of each member of the House of Representatives to 2,100, and also modifying the way that the president is chosen so that both media and money have very little to do with the choice. Anyway, so we'll see. Dan Bongino during the weekend came out. He's he's number 2 in the FBI right now, under Kash Patel. And he said that, the things that he has seen as the deputy director of FBI have changed him. And he says that he will never be the same. And obviously he has signed all sorts of non-disclosure agreements and stuff like that, and he's under, because in order to protect his security clearance, he's not able to talk about a lot of stuff. But it's clear that he's talking about corruption within the American government and within the American political system. I think he's talking about a weaponization of political structure, and I think this kind of confirms Father's assessment that the American system is broken. And Father made this assessment long, long time ago. In fact, he said, democracy just isn't going to cut it. Communism is not going to work. Democracy is not going to work. Democracy is not going to work. Neither one is going to work. And what you have to have is something new, centering on true parents. And people say, well, this whole thing about the unification church and true parents, it's okay, it's their right to believe that, but no one else is going to ever believe it. But that's what it's going to take. The American system, political system, is broken, and people who get to go behind the curtain can see that. Dan Bongino now is behind the curtain, and he can see that. And Pam Bondi is behind the curtain, and she can see that. And Kristi Noem is behind the curtain, and she's able to see that. And these people, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what books they write after they come out from behind the curtain. But it's being confirmed that Father is correct, that democracy is not going to work. The system is broken, and we need a new system. So anyway, it's just a matter of time before that has to happen. All right. So what was I talking about here? Okay. All right. And let's see here. Okay. Blagojevich, lunatics have taken over the Democrat asylum because we've known that for a long time. Oh yeah, okay. Cartel shift methods with Trump. Right. Conspiracy theories are written. Roseanne Barr. Gordon Chang, CCP land buys in Oklahoma a problem. I tell you, my opinion of Gordon Chang was kind of neutral, but then when I read, I guess it was Saturday, right? When I read what he proposed to the Hudson Institute seminar, that when the CCP breaks down, that the United States should go in and secure the financial institutions. My opinion of him took a nosedive, absolute nosedive, right? And Lindsey Graham, it's similar to Lindsey Graham, who brings up the example of Tokyo and Berlin in 1945, and also Gordon Chang bringing up the example of Japan and Germany in 1945, whose militaries had been destroyed. Excuse me, Mr. Chang. The militaries in Japan and Korea, Japan and Germany in 45 had been destroyed. So there was a military vacuum, all right? And you could send American military in there at that time. But when the CCP goes down, the Chinese military will still be intact. And it's not the financial institutions that are going to be our first priority. What is it? Why, during that Hudson Institute seminar, why did no one mention the nuclear weapons? The nuclear weapons. This was the great concern when the Soviet Union disintegrated. Who's going to control the nukes? And they worked it out because Russia and Ukraine at that time was very amenable to doing basically what the West wanted to do, which was to take those nuclear weapons in the Soviet Union and kind of neutralize many of them. But when the CCP goes down, it's going to be very different. And someone's going to get a hold of those nukes. Someone's going to get a hold of the nuclear codes and the chain of command, at least for some of them. So what's going to happen then? I think the fall of the CCP could become very, very, very messy. And who controls the money in China, I think is going to be, well, not our number one priority, I would think. Not our number one priority. All right, let's see. Yeah, the Federal Reserve is going to determine rates this Wednesday, or Tuesday and Wednesday. They'll announce it on Wednesday. And again, we all know that price fixing doesn't work, and yet we let the Federal Reserve fix the price of capital. Okay. Again, the system is broken. Okay, this is just another example of how the system is broken. But also with President Trump, President Trump wants them to drop rates by 3 percentage points from the 4.25 or so it is right now down to something like 1.25 or something, or at least one, maybe even lower. But one person posed an interesting question. So who's going to buy U.S. debt at 1%? When you know that inflation is coming, okay, you know that inflation is coming. Oh, look at that. We're already out of time. Boy, time flies. What happened to, did I walk through a time warp or something? Anyway, yeah, I gotta go. But just imagine this, okay? But the answer, of course, is that some institutions and some sort of pensions and so forth will be forced by the government to purchase those debt instruments. All right, gotta go. See you tomorrow. God bless, Godspeed. May His kingdom come quickly.